As you're listening to this, 4 human beings are hurtling through space at roughly 24,000 miles per hour, headed for the moon. It's not a simulation, it's not a movie, it's actually happening right now. There's enough going on in the world that you could be forgiven for not knowing this. I'm not judging, but I want you to know about it. Artemis II launched, the SLS cleared the pad, and for the first time since 1972, since the last time Chicago native Gene Cernan walked on the lunar surface and climbed back into the lunar lander, humans are looking back at a shrinking blue marble. I'm Keith Conrad. This is Sidequests. I fell down this rabbit hole, and now I'm taking you with me. And today we're telling the story of how we got here, because it wasn't easy. It wasn't fast, and honestly, it probably should have happened a lot sooner. This is the 23-year political odyssey behind a 10-day mission to the moon.
Why don't you fix your little problems and light this candle?
He's right. Let's light this candle.
He surely is. Light the candle.
Yes.
On February 1st of 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart over Texas on re-entry. 7 astronauts were killed. It was the second space shuttle disaster in 17 years, and the review board came to an unexpected conclusion. The space shuttle was intended to make spaceflight safer and less expensive. It had succeeded in doing neither of those things. The space shuttle was a remarkable machine and an incredibly fragile one. It flew only to low Earth orbit, it cost $1 billion a flight, and after Columbia it was clear. This just wasn't a sustainable path for the future. So in 2004, President George W. Bush announced something they called the Vision for Space Exploration. The goal was to retire the shuttle, build new rockets, return humans to the moon by 2020, and eventually push on to Mars. This program was called Constellation. The hardware was 2 rockets, the Ares 1 for the crew and Ares 5 for cargo, and a new capsule called Orion. Sound familiar? It should. Orion is what's carrying those 4 astronauts right now. For a few years, things moved along, not fast. NASA rarely moves fast, but they moved. And then in 2008, something happened. The financial crisis hit everything. NASA wasn't immune. In 2009, the Obama administration commissioned a review of the entire space program. It was called the Augustine Commission, named after former Lockheed Martin CEO Norm Augustine. And they came back with a verdict. Constellation was, quote, on an unsustainable trajectory. Basically, they were about $3 million a year behind where they needed to be, and it wasn't going to make the 2020 moon landing deadline anyway. So in February of 2010, the Obama administration proposed canceling Constellation entirely. All of it. Ares 1, Ares 5, and the moon mission. Interestingly, this wasn't one of the recommendations from the Augustine Commission. The White House invented that one all on their own. Now, to be fair to them, the intention wasn't to kill manned spaceflight. The plan was to shift heavy lifting to commercial companies and redirect NASA towards research. It was a real philosophy and not just a budget cut. The problem was that it didn't come with any sort of a goal. The plan was essentially to have commercial spaceflights begin by 2017, and then the next president would decide what to do next. Now, maybe there was some logic there, not wanting to make a decision for your successor, but that's not how things work at NASA. Programs run for multiple administrations, and you have to think bigger than the next election. The Obama administration didn't, and for a brief disorienting moment, the United States had absolutely no plan for space other than, we'll get back there one day. That's when Congress got involved, and naturally that makes things even more messy. Members of both parties, from states with NASA centers and aerospace contractors, essentially just said, no, you're not canceling this. We will not lose those jobs, this workforce, the industrial base. And so Congress mandated the construction of a new rocket, the Space Launch System, or SLS. They also kept Orion going, but only Orion. We'll get to that in a second. Critics immediately called SLS the Senate Launch System, a rocket engineered around political districts rather than mission requirements. It was largely built from shuttle-era parts, the same RS-25 engines, extended versions of the same solid rocket boosters. Not because those were the best technological choices available, but because the factories that made them were already up and running and workers who built them had senators.
Hey, Harry.
Yeah, right.
You know we're sitting on 4 million pounds of fuel, one nuclear weapon, and a thing that has 270,000 moving parts, built by the lowest bidder. Oh, makes you feel good, doesn't it?
It wasn't exactly an efficient way to build a rocket, but it did keep the program alive through a period when it might have died completely. Both things are true, and that's the frustrating part. So now you have a rocket and a capsule, and absolutely no agreement on what to do with either of them. As a matter of fact, the capsule was there, but there wasn't any money for a service module to actually keep the crew alive in space, which is kind of an important thing. Ultimately, the European Space Agency stepped up with that piece of the puzzle. For years, NASA floated something called the Asteroid Redirect Mission, the idea of sending astronauts to rendezvous with a boulder that robots had hauled into lunar orbit. So think about that. First of all, we had to come up with a way to get the asteroid into lunar orbit and then rendezvous with it there. That's pretty complicated. You can feel the ambivalence in that sentence. It felt like what it was, a placeholder, something to point at while the grown-ups figured out what the actual destination was going to be. The moon, Mars, something in between. The answer kept changing depending on who was in the White House. And the whole time, SLS was still being built, slowly, expensively, missing deadlines, mostly thanks to contractors, especially one in particular, but I won't name any names. Each missed deadline produced a new round of headlines and how this was going to be the most expensive rocket ever built and it might not ever actually fly. Some of those headlines were pretty fair and some weren't. Meanwhile, the engineers at NASA just did their best. Then in 2017, the first Trump administration comes in, takes one look at the situation and does, well, kind of nothing. The asteroid mission was going to be tough to pull off, so that was scrapped, but the rocket was too big to just send an Orion capsule into orbit. There's really only one place you could go with it, the moon. The program got a new name, Artemis, after the Greek goddess of the moon, and, not coincidentally, the twin sister of Apollo. Finally, after 14 years of rockets looking for a place to go, there was a destination. Artemis I finally flew, without a crew, in November of 2022, 18 years or so after NASA started the whole journey after the Columbia accident. Now it was time to get some astronauts out there. Before we get to what's happening right now, we should talk about who exactly is up there. Commanding the mission is Reid Wiseman, naval aviator, former chief of the astronaut office, so the boss gets to go first. He's the first lunar mission commander since Gene Cernan boarded Apollo 17 in 1972. Flying with him is Victor Glover. He flew to the International Space Station in 2020, and now he becomes the first person of color to travel beyond Earth orbit. Talked about wanting to be, in his words, a force for good, not just an astronaut, but a symbol of who exploration belongs to, which is everyone. Mission specialist Christina Koch holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman, 328 days on the International Space Station. On a mission where psychological endurance matters as much as anything else, she's arguably the most qualified human alive for a trip like this. And rounding out the crew is Jeremy Hansen of the Canadian Space Agency. He actually becomes the first non-American to leave Earth's orbit. This is an international mission in ways that Apollo wasn't, and Hansen's presence is the proof of it. So now let's talk about what the mission actually is. The SLS, the rocket Congress mandated and critics mocked, produces 8.8 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. To give you a sense of what that means, it's more powerful than the Saturn V that sent Apollo to the moon. The launch was out of Pad 39B at Kennedy Space Center. 39A, which was used for most manned launches, is now run by SpaceX. After launch, the crew didn't just head straight for the moon. They spend the first roughly 24 hours in Earth orbit, close enough to abort back home if something was wrong with the life support systems. Think of it like the longest safety check in history. That's the difference between this mission and a landing mission. This is a stress test. It's Wiseman, Glover, Koch, and Hansen going farther than any humans have gone before, and then coming home. If they survive a 25,000 mile per hour re-entry in an Orion capsule that's never carried humans on this sort of mission, the path to the surface opens up. Their trajectory they're flying takes them 4,600 miles beyond the far side of the moon. It's a free return path, meaning if an engine fails or anything, physics brings them back home anyway. That number is significant, though. It breaks the record set by Apollo 13 for the furthest human beings have traveled from Earth. Christina Koch, all those days aboard the ISS, prepared her for the psychological reality of being small and far away from Earth, helping to fly the capsule with the precision that comes from years of carrier landings in the dark. Reid Wiseman is doing what commanders do, keeping everyone focused on the next task, not the enormity of what they're actually doing. And Jeremy Hansen is looking out the window at a planet his species has never viewed from this distance. This isn't a landing. That won't be until Artemis IV at the earliest. This is the mission that makes the landing possible. And here's the thing about the 22-year gap between the Columbia accident and Artemis II. Politicians argued over budgets. Administrations canceled programs and started new ones. Congress built a rocket out of legacy parts and called it a strategy. The goal changed from the moon to asteroids to nothing to the moon again. 2 decades, billions of dollars, a lot of bureaucratic motion that looked, from the outside, like not much movement at all. But the engineers kept working. The astronauts kept training. The people who built Orion, some of whom were working on its predecessor designs way back when Bush announced Constellation in 2004, stayed at their desks. In a few days, the crew of Artemis II will splash down in the Pacific. When they do, the 50-year gap won't just be closed, it'll be history. Hopefully for good. The argument will shift to when we land, not whether or not we'll land. The screw-up took 23 years. The mission is taking 10 days. They're out there right now, crossing the void, and we'll be here when they get back.
The moon belongs to America and anxiously awaits the arrival of our astroband. Will you be among them?